according to their guidance and teachings. Tonight's talk is entitled Jihad and the Crusades. So inshallah we'll be trying to draw some comparisons about the behavior of Muslim mujahids and the behavior of the warriors of the Crusades and other similar fighters and warriors. To begin with, in Islam, war is only permissible for the protection of Muslims. It is not permissible to expand the boundaries of the Muslim state. It is not permissible to invade others to control their mineral resources, their oil wells, their diamond mines, their gold ores, etc. It is not permissible to invade others and captivate the indigenous populations and then transport them en masse to another place and use them as indentured labor, etc., etc. The only reason for which Islam permits the waging of war is to protect Islam and Muslims, to uphold the word of Islam, to uphold the word of Allah. Muslim scholars therefore have discussed, because if we say that, that means it goes without saying that war is absolutely forbidden amongst Muslims by definition. Since war is only allowed to protect Islam and Muslims, that means war amongst Muslims themselves is by definition prohibited. So therefore war can only take place, it can only take place with non-Muslims, Islamically. Our scholars have discussed if war, which the Quran permits with non-Muslims in certain conditions, is it because they, that means the other party with whom the Muslims engage in war with, is it because they are non-Muslims, or is it because of their belligerence and arrogance? Do we fight the others because they are non-Muslims, or because they are arrogant and belligerent against Muslims? What does the Quran say? The Quran says, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. The Quran says, وَلَا تُقَاتِلُوهُمْ عِنْدَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ حَتَّى يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ فِيهِ فَإِنْ قَاتَلُوكُمْ فَاقْتُلُوهُمْ. The Quran says, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ وَاقْتُلُوهُمْ حَيْثُ ثَقِفْتُمُوهُمْ وَأَخْرِجُوهُمْ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَخْرَجُوكُمْ وَلَا تُقَاتِلُوهُمْ عِنْدَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ حَتَّى يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ فِيهِ فَإِنْ قَاتَلُوكُمْ فَاقْتُلُوهُمْ كَذَلِكَ جَزَاءُ الْكَافِرِينَ فَإِنِ انْتَهَوْا فَلَا عُدْوَانَ إِلَّا عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ فَإِنِ انْتَهَوْا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ الشهر الحرام بالشهر الحرام. والحرمات قصاص. The verses says, fight in the name of Allah those who fight against you. It's saying, fight in the name of Allah those who fight against you. Those who fight against you, when you meet them, fight them and kill them. Surely, when it's war, there's no joke. We can't exchange niceties. It's war. It's a matter of life and death. But these manners of which life is preserved or life is taken is subject to a whole comprehensive code of do's and don'ts. And the do's, they are subject to a number of codes of how to do these acts. This verse, along with the other verse in which says وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً, and another verse in which Allah says فَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبَ الرِّقَابِ حَتَّى إِذَا أَثْخَنْتُمُوهُمْ فَشُدُّوا الْوَثَاقَ فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً حَتَّى تَضَعَ الْحَرْبُ أَوْزَارَهَا. What does the second verse say? The second verse says, fight them so that Muslims are not intimidated in upholding their faith. That means if there is no intimidation against Muslims, there is no reason to fight them. What does the third verse say? The third verse says, it is in a sequence, it is in a context and sequence of verses which talk about war. It says, and then when you meet them, when you meet the unbelievers in the battlefield, فَضَرْبَ الرِّقَابِ, chop off their heads. You're meeting them in the battlefield. You're not going to give them cookies. You're not going to tell them, no, we're not going to fight, because then people will say Muslims are bloodthirsty. When we weren't going to meet in the battlefield, what were they going to do to the Muslims? You either kill or you get killed. This is a battlefield. It's not a cocktail party in your house. So when you meet them, Allah says in the battlefield, you chop off their heads until you overpower them. Once you have overpowered them, you take them in captivity. This is all the verse the Quran speaking. حَتَّى إِذَا أَثْخَنْتُمُوهُمْ, once you have overpowered them, فَشُدُّوا الْوَثَاقِ, then take them in captivity. فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً حَتَّى تَضَعَ الْحَرْبُ أَوْزَارَهَا. Once you've taken them in captivity, then either release them, that means once you know that there's no danger from them, release them without any ransom, or release them for a ransom. It doesn't say kill them anyway. Once you have overpowered them, it doesn't say kill them anyway. So if waging war was permissible only because the other party is non-Muslim, then the Quran would not say once you have overpowered the non-Muslim, then release them for a ransom or without a ransom, because he's a non-Muslim. It would say, once you've overpowered them, then surely annihilate them. Surely kill them off. You have overpowered them and they are non-Muslims and they are remaining as non-Muslims in your captivity. Why should you let them be? The Quran does not say that. In fact, it says once you have overpowered them, you release them. Once their danger is over. And it says you release them in one of two ways. Imma mannan, without anything in return. Wa imma fida'an, or you release them for a ransom. Ransom could be money, or it could be that they have Muslims in captivity. So you say, you release our Muslim captives and we will release your non-Muslim captives. This is what a number of what the Quran says regarding the causes of war. Let us look about let us see what some hadiths say regarding the matter of waging of war. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Ughzu fi sabilillah, ughzu fi sabilillah." You must fight in the name of Allah, not for any worldly deeds. When you fight only in the name of Allah, for the cause of Allah, for a matter, for a reason which pleases Allah. Number 2, he says, when you fight, لا تقتلوا صبيا ولا شيخا فانيا ولا راهبا ولا تقطعوا شجرة ولا تعقروا شاة, and so on. He makes a number of injunctions regarding the codes and etiquettes of war. Once you have gone to fight in the way of Allah, you do not kill women, you do not kill the elderly people, you do not kill monks or the likes of monks who do not take part in the effort of war. Nor should you cut or burn trees, nor should you unnecessarily kill animals. Kill animals only for food if you need to kill animals, unless of course they are the animals, they are using them as animals of war, such as the horses or the camels which they are riding as means of war. That's another thing. Okay, so if war was permissible only because the other party are non-Muslims, then it would make no sense to say don't kill women, don't kill elderly people, because they are non-Muslims anyway. And you're waging war, so you kill them because they are non-Muslims. If that was the reason for which Islam permits war against non-Muslims. So these verses and these hadiths make it clear. These verses and these hadiths make it clear that the reason for which war is permitted, it's either to stop aggression from the warring side, or it's to preempt aggression and belligerence from the other side. What is it about aggression that Islam does not like? Is that it subjects Muslims to intimidation. It intimidates Muslims and does not allow them or makes them wave. It subjects them to all sorts of pressures to give up Islam. This Islam does not accept or tolerate or compromise if it can in any way help itself to do so. These are the only reasons for which war is permissible, no other reason. Now let us look at the other side. Of course, I am being not as brief as possible, even more brief than that, because we have started late, and but this is something that I'm more than willing to take even 3 or 4 sessions upon, once we see that this is necessary or it is required by the brothers. Let us see what has happened to the other side. But before that, let me remain on the Muslim side of the warring parties. Once war has taken place and 2 warring parties have met on the field, there are a number of Islamic codes which must govern the war. One is what we just heard in the saying of the Prophet, that you don't kill the non-combatants. The people who are non-combatant, you don't kill them. You don't go near them. unnecessarily. Number two, you don't even do any unnecessary damage to the property of the warring party, as long as you can help it, unless it's of course used by the other party for the war effort. Number three, you keep on making the opportunity available to the other party while you're waging war to learn about Islam and hear what Islam has to offer mankind. This is number three on our one. Number four, once you have overpowered them, you must know that they have a number of rights, depending also on how this overpowering has taken place. If it has happened, if it's a conditional overpowering, that you must abide by all the conditions. During the war, if a person comes from the other side, and any Muslim, and according to all four jurists, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, alaykum salam, if any member of the Muslim community gives immunity, if any member of the Muslim community gives refuge to anyone from the other side, even if this member of the Muslim community is not part of the war bureaucracy, the Ministry of Defense, it could be an elderly person, it could be a lady, and according to the vast majority of scholars, it could be even a Muslim slave. If any such person gives refuge to anyone from the other party, then the Muslims have to uphold the refuge of that Muslim, given to the non-Muslim from the other side in the war. That means during the war, a combatant comes and seeks the refuge of a Muslim in the war, and some Muslim gives him refuge without first asking the permission of the military commander. Not that he does it in secret, he does it openly, but doesn't ask permission. Then the Muslim commander must uphold that refuge given to him. Of course, the Muslim commander has the right to negate the refuge only, but on conditional to giving him the opportunity to return back to his own camp. Okay? So the Muslim army is engaging in war with a non-Muslim army, and someone comes from the other side, not officially, and seeks refuge from a Muslim. Say, give me refuge, I'm too exhausted, I don't want to fight, or I'm coward, I don't want to fight, or whatever. Or this is a war that I'm not convinced about, just give me refuge. And one Muslim gives that person refuge, whether this Muslim is a military person or a civilian person. And whether as a civilian person he's an elderly person, a middle-aged person, man or woman, even an adolescent, if he's a mature adolescent. And according to most scholars, this is according to all scholars, according to most scholars, with the exception of Abu Hanifa, even if he is a slave, if he's a Muslim slave, he can give refuge, which the military commander has to respect and uphold. If the military commander then decides that this refuge cannot be upheld by the Muslims, then he has to give that non-Muslim enough ample opportunity to return to the other side of the battlefield and tell him, no, you must go back, Otherwise, if you don't go back, for example, in so many hours or such a span of time, you will not be under the protection of anyone. If the other side accepts to desist from war on the condition offered by the Muslims, and the Muslims have to offer all alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah, all potential combatants one of three choices. Either they embrace Islam, or they accept the power and sovereignty of Islam upon them, and they pay the Muslims the jizya, for which they will not be asked to do military service, and for which the Muslims will be responsible to protect their life and property. Or they leave the area under Muslim control. All of them must be given one of these three choices to make freely. If this overpowered community, before being overpowered, had not been given this choice, Muslim law says, and it has happened in Muslim history, that the Muslims have to return from their lands and give back to them what they took through blood and war. And this has happened a number of times in Muslim history. Two very important, prominent examples can be cited. Once was in the days of the Sahaba, during one of the battles which took place in northern Syria. During one of the battles which took place in northern Syria, having overpowered some communities in northern Syria who had accepted to pay the Muslims the jizya for the protection of their wealth and property, the Muslims heard that a very large army was going to invade the area from the north. And they were in no situation to remain there and fight. They had to go back and ask for support. So if they retreated, these non-Muslims which had accepted Muslim rule over them and were offered Muslim protection, they would be subject to the wrath of these invading, also non-Muslim armies. The Muslims promptly gave back to them all the money which they had received for their being immune from military service and for their being given the protection of life and property. They said, we cannot now protect your life and property since we are retreating, so here is what you gave us. This happened once during the days of the companions of the Prophet, after the death of the Prophet. Another very prominent example happened during the days of the Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, about the year towards the end of the first Muslim century. Towards the end of the first Muslim century. The Muslims had conquered an area in Central Asia, near Samarkand. And when the Muslim armies had entered the city near Samarkand, a delegation of the Muslim army had met the delegation of the community's leaders of that city. And now they were discussing the terms of handing over the city to them. So while they are discussing this, they understand the Muslims are supposed to offer them these three choices. So they say, but we weren't offered all these three matters. I think they were offered two or something, or one. We weren't given the choice of one of these three things, these three matters. So a dispute occurs between them. And the capital of the Muslim state was halfway across the world, in Damascus. And especially in those days, you can imagine how far Damascus seemed from Central Asia. So this delegation of leaders of this community of Samarkand had the confidence to dispute the claims of the leaders of the Muslim army, and had the confidence to ask for adjudication. And they said, no, we don't accept that you should have the last say in this dispute. We are disputing here. Let your ruler decide in this matter. We're taking you as in modern terms. We're suing you. We're going to sue you. Who is suing who? The vanquished is suing the victorious army. So they sent a delegation all the way to Damascus. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, on hearing this, he has to clarify matters also. He can't decide there. So he sends a delegation headed by a judge. And he authorizes him to judge in this matter. He says, you hear both sides and you judge in this matter. I don't remember the full name of the person. His name was Jumay'. His first name was Jumay'. Second name was probably Amir. I don't remember. But his first name was Jumay'. The judge, yeah. So the judge, on going there, imagine how many months this had taken. At least 1 month going, at least. And a few days they had to stay there until they meet the Khalifa and explain everything to him. And another 1 or 2 months going back. And then he listens to the disputing parties, and he judges in the favor of the vanquished community. And lo and behold, the Muslim armies pack up their tents and they literally start moving, leaving. When these people, they see with their own eyes, no, that this is not something, not diplomatic niceties that we are experiencing, that we are observing. This is a fact. These people are actually going to leave and give us back our city. They said, please, you remain here and you protect us, because we are also attacked every now and then by these, marauding tribes of other tribes of Central Asia. We remain under your law and protection is better than you leaving us, and tomorrow another invading army from Central Asia will invade us and then will subject us to ruthless persecution. If your law is like that, no, we want you. We willingly want you to stay here. Now compare this to what happened to Muslims in 3 areas when the Muslims were the vanquished. The Muslims had ruled Spain for 800 years, and the Christian community was always remained in Andalusian Spain. Jews, in fact, have never prospered in their history under the rule of non-Jews as they prospered, especially in Andalusian Spain. Of course, as they have always had their rights protected wherever they've lived amongst Muslims, but especially in Andalusian Spain. And even today's Jews talk about the golden age of Jewish philosophy, which took root and grew in Andalusian Spain. And they always talk about their very famous philosopher Ibn Maimunadis, who was born and grew up and started writing in Andalusian Spain, and then of course he left and until he reached Salah ad-Din, and he became his close and entrusted physician, doctor. Anyway, for 800 years, Christians living under Andalusian Muslims are protected, and their culture is untouched, no persecution. As for Jews, they even prospered. Jews who were persecuted in other parts of Christian Europe, whenever they could, they would migrate to Andalusian Spain. When the Muslims are vanquished, what happens? The last Muslim ruler who was vanquished was in 1492. And of course there were lots of truces and agreements when this last ruler had to leave. So in Muslim community, a number of Muslim communities remained, but their numbers were reducing until about mid-16th century, 1540 or so, when the last battle was waged against Muslim pockets, community pockets, for no reason other than finished. There was no one there to protect them, and so whatever agreements were made were not even worth the ink on the paper, and these Muslims were literally slaughtered. Those who were not physically annihilated eventually lost their identity by the threats of the tortures of the Inquisition. Before the end of that century, there was not one living Muslim in Andalusian Spain, after having been there and ruling it for over 800 years. No Muslims remained there. In fact, in this century, for the first time, after the demise of General Franco, some Muslims, because Muslims, lots of them were calligraphers, some of them had retained this profession and this craftsmanship in their own family. So it seemed that over the centuries, the only thing that they could bequeath to their children was that we are the remainders of the Moors. They didn't even know the word Muslim, but they used to know that they are actually, the ancestors were slightly different. But this was something they had to keep in secret. So for the first time, some families started coming out in the open and saying that we are the descendants of the Moors. Because the Europeans used to call the Muslims, what? Moors. They used to call them Moors, and they used to call them Saracens. But mainly Muslims of Spain were called Moors. And this is why also in the Philippines, which was ruled by the Spanish, they started calling Muslims in the south the Moros. This title of the Moors of Spain they brought with them to the Philippines. The Muslims never called themselves Moros, but they called them Moros. Anyway, this is one example. Another example is Jerusalem and what happened in the Crusades. We know that there were a number of crusades which took place toward the end of the first millennium, and in the year 485 Hijri, the invading Europeans managed to conquer Jerusalem. Al-Quds and take it from the Muslims. But they took it from the Muslims conditionally. The Muslims, on seeing the siege being laid upon them in Jerusalem, the Muslims in Jerusalem, and they knew that they couldn't overpower these strong armies, and Muslims in the other area were too divided. There were lots of small princedoms who were entering into different sorts of alliances against one another. So they were too consumed in their sort of personal rivalries and bitter animosities to be concerned with the plight of Muslims who were attacked by others. So anyway, the Muslims accept to let these invading armies enter and take over Jerusalem conditionally. This condition was that they do not kill any Muslim, and that they do not subject any Muslim place of worship to destruction. No sooner than the gates of Jerusalem being opened and the armies entering and realizing that there is no resistance to be met, they started slaughtering them. They started slaughtering them in the streets, and the Muslims ran away into the mosque, the Jerusalem mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa. In that small mosque had held about 100,000 people. They were so cramped because they thought that the mosque, being a holy place, it will offer them sanctuary. Because even today, in the end of the 20th century, in some Catholic countries in Western Europe, churches are places of sanctuary. That means if, for example, some criminal is being pursued by the police and he manages to reach a church, then the police cannot do anything to him. It's like he's given some sort of immunity, unless the church permits it. Even today, towards the end of the 20th century. But not in all Western European countries, only in some Catholic countries in Western Europe. Anyway, all these 100,000 Muslims, 100,000 or so, were butchered in a matter of hours. Of course, the number of dead exceeded that by a lot, if taking the whole of Jerusalem into consideration. 88 years later, the Muslims retake Jerusalem under the leadership of who? Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. How do they retake Jerusalem? In exactly a similar manner. Salah ad-Din had managed to vanquish all these Crusade leaders, military leaders, who were between him and Jerusalem. So he clears the path all the way from Egypt to Jerusalem, and almost all the way from Damascus on the other side to Jerusalem. There were some pockets on the Mediterranean coast still held in the hand of the Crusades. And he lays siege on Jerusalem. So after a while, the head bishop of Jerusalem meets Salah ad-Din outside. He comes for a meeting to discuss the conditions of surrender. And he asks that, of course, no church be touched, no person be killed, and that all members of the church, all their gold and silver, if they want to take with themselves, if they want to leave Jerusalem, they be allowed to take with themselves and leave Jerusalem. So after discussing and consulting with his commanders, Salah ad-Din, he accepts, because he doesn't know, he thinks that maybe how much gold and silver can they have if they want to leave? Because some of the commanders say, no, why should we let them leave with the gold and silver? And then they take this gold and silver to go and prepare armies against us in another place. They want to, it's enough that we will not harass them, we will protect their life and property, we will not touch any church. Never has any Muslim touched the place of worship of any religion at all. So why should we let them take the gold and silver with them as well? So they discuss, and there's some dispute and dialogue and debate and all. In the end, Salah ad-Din decides to let him be. So after he enters Jerusalem and everything is in control and their Muslim armies have consolidated their hold, this head priest, head bishop, starts leaving Jerusalem with a caravan of his slaves who are carrying and loading these camels with, barrels of precious stones and gold and silver. And they have taken these lanterns, huge heavy lanterns like chandeliers. Chandeliers were not from glass and crystal, from gold and silver. Taking this. So some of the commanders wanted to stop him. No, he said, we didn't talk about all the wealth of Jerusalem to take with you. What a normal person can carry with himself. Salah ad-Din, his face changes and he is hurt because he felt that he's cheated. He said, we gave him our word and we don't break our word. So he leaves Jerusalem with probably all the treasury of Jerusalem. And no one touches him. When Jerusalem was taken, only 88 years before that, 100,000 Muslims were slaughtered in the Aqsa Mosque itself. Let alone the others who were slaughtered in around other places. A third example is the example of the Balkans. The example of the Balkans. We're not going to go into detail in this matter. We all know, and we don't want to renew the pains and the hurts of this war. But even after the so-called peace which has taken place in the Balkans, as recently as 10, 12 days ago, whole apartments of Muslims are burnt to prevent the Muslims to come back to their areas, which are due to Muslims according to these humiliating peace treaties which the Muslims have entered in. Although it's humiliating against them, but they decided that it was better than this war to continue. Under these terms, which are fully and totally pro-Serbian against the Bosnian Muslims, still the few houses which are supposed to return to Muslims, few apartments supposed to return to Muslims, are burnt before the Muslims return, as recently as 10, 12 days ago. The first thing that they do when they take over a Muslim area is to demolish the mosque. The very first thing that they do. The first people that they seek to kill are the imams. Because they are the identity of the Muslim community. They are the people who give the Muslims, the individuals, their identity. Otherwise, they are all Slavs. In fact, the Bosnians are more Slavs than the Serbs. They are like the Croats. They are the Serbs are actually Slavs right from the eastern side of Europe, but Croats and Bosnian Muslims are more from Central Europe. So the Bosnian Muslims are much more European than the Serbs. We're not saying that they're much more European than the Croats, but they're much more European than the Serbs. And even their features, if you noticed in the news, are much more European than the features of the Serbs. The Serbs have color of skin and hair like us in the Middle East, but the Bosnians are more blonde, more blue-eyed. What happens to the churches of the Serbs or the Croats for that matter, because the atrocities of the Croats are no less than the atrocities of the Serbs against the Muslims. What happens to the churches of the Serbs and Croats when Muslims take over areas of Serbs and Croats? The very first thing that they do is that they appoint guards on these churches, because they know that individuals can be overcome with emotion. They might do something undesired against these churches. So who protects these churches? The Muslims themselves. Which Muslims? Who have been subjected to the demolition of their own mosques by the inhabitants of these communities who prayed in these churches. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that one of the main also reasons for war being permitted is to protect churches and masjids. Allah says in the Quran, وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعُ. Sawami' are the places in which monks worship. وَبِيَعٌ. Biya'un is the plural of synagogue or a church, both. وَصَلَوَاتٌ, also places of worship of the people of the book, Jews or Christians. وَمَسَاجِدُ يُذْكَرُ فِيهَا اسْمُ اللَّهِ كَثِيرًا وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَقَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. Had it not been that Allah causes people to fight against one another, then all these places of worship, Allah says, would be demolished. So why is war permitted? Amongst the reasons, to protect these places of worship. Which places of worship? The masjid? No, the last place of worship which is mentioned, which is named in the Quran, is the masjid. First Allah says, biya'un wa salawatun wa masajidu. Sawami' wa biya'un wa salawatun wa masajidu yudhkaru fiha ismullah. So war is not permitted in Islam for a reason other than protecting Islam and Muslims from either actual attack or from an expected attack. That means we are allowed to attack others to preempt an expected attack from them. We are allowed that. We are not saying that Muslims have to stay until they are attacked, then they start to fight and all. No, this is stupid. No one says this. No community in the world has ever practiced this. If you know that your enemy is planning an attack against you, you're not going to wait until they actually embark on that attack. You preempt their attack and put it off in the bud, as long as you can help it, of course. You are not allowed to wage any war, to take any life for any worldly greed or needs at all. Whereas all wars waged against Muslims have been for these two reasons: to extinguish Islam or to take over the wealth and resources in the land of Islam. These are the two glaring differences between the codes of war on these both camps. Wallahu a'lam, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. You know, when Nur Miswari, when he adopted this name, the Moro Liberation Front, you know, it was a sarcastic attempt to draw attention to the fact that, you know, that the Muslims are persecuted, even starting with their name, un-Islamic, and even those waging the war don't have the courage to say that it's being waged in the name of Islam, except on very few occasions. But otherwise, for example, to mention, let's say, Morocco and Western Sahara, neither of the two parties say this is a war which is being waged in the name of Islam or for an Islamic cause or for an Islamic purpose. Right? Or the dispute between Algeria and Morocco. Okay? Or the dispute between Iraq and Syria. For worldly purposes. Yes, worldly purposes.
How should be the war waged on today's circumstances? Muslims are
Today's, yesterday's, or tomorrow's. These are the reasons for war, only. Only to protect Islam and Muslims.